More than 30 years ago, a gruesome murder sent shivers through the quiet hills of Braemar Hill, Hong Kong. A young British couple, both high school seniors, set up for a day of leisure at Sisay Lake Park in North Point, only to vanish without a trace. One day later, their bodies were discovered. What investigators found wasn't an image of two vibrant teenagers, but the aftermath of a savage attack. The autopsy revealed horrors beyond imagination. They had been bludgeoned to death with wooden sticks. The brutal assault left over 200 wounds, each mark telling the story of the torment. The girl's fate was even more horrific. Before her death, she endured multiple sexual assaults. Her face mutilated beyond recognition. Her left eye gone, tore from its socket, never recovered. Despite the crime's brutality, the investigation hit a wall. In 1980s Hong Kong, forensic technology was still primitive. For 6 long months, investigators found no leads, no suspects, just the whispers of a crime too horrific to be forgotten. Then, a father's determination broke the silence. The murdered boy's father, refusing to let the case grow cold, persuaded his company's CEO to increase the reward money from 50k Hong Kong dollars to a staggering 550k. Finally, after 6 months of darkness, the first clue emerged. What really happened on Braemar Hill? Why were these young lovers targeted? And who were the monsters capable of such inhuman cruelty? At dawn, the Hong Kong police received a chilling report. A man of his routine morning jog near Braemar Hill had stumbled upon something unforgettable. Around 6 a.m., through these misty trails, he spotted a young foreign man in blue jeans lying motionless roughly 300 feet ahead on a patch of grass. Initially, he thought the man was sleeping, but something seemed off. The morning air was damp, dew clinging to every blade of grass. Who would choose to sleep here on the cold, wet earth? As unease grew, he moved closer. At about 160 feet away, his stomach knotted. The man's position was unnatural. His hands were bound tightly behind his back. His body sprawled face down across the grass. A shiver crawled down the juggler's spine. He called out twice, his voice piercing the ear of silence. No responses. Horror dawned like a thunderbolt. Something was terribly wrong. Despite his fear, morbid curiosity drew him forward. Step by hesitant step, he approached, and then he saw the truth. The young man was dead. A scream ripped through the empty hillside as panic seized him. He turned and ran with one thought, to get help. But in 1985, there were no mobile phones, no easy way to call emergency services. He sprinted all the way down the mountain, through empty streets and past shuttered shops, until he found a small roadside store with a telephone. With trembling hands, he dialed. When the line connected, his voice, breathless and shaking, spoke words that would soon shake Hong Kong to its core. There's a dead body upon Braemar Hill. The police responded immediately, following the juggler's direction with grim determination. There, in the morning fog of Braemar Hill, they found him, the first victim of a nightmare that had only just begun. As the officers turned the body over, the full horror became apparent. The victim was a young, blonde-haired man, his features obscured by devastating injuries. His upper clothing had been nearly torn to shreds, hanging the tatters from his battered body. His face sent a wave of shock through the officers. It was unrecognizable, reduced to a mass of blood, torn flesh, and bruised bone. The brutality had erased his identity, leaving only disturbing detail. Half-open eyes staring into nothingness, a tongue protruding unnaturally, and a head drenched in congealed blood, the final remnants of his suffering frozen in time. Yet, there was more. A bandage wrapped tightly around his collarbone, its taut grip suggesting a sinister purpose. The examination of his body revealed further horrors. His chest and back were torn apart. The flesh split open like a grotesque canvas. Countless marks, deep bruises, and gashes testified to relentless, merciless beatings. The weapon weren't just fists, but wooden sticks and tree branches, blunt instruments used to systematically break him. Through careful analysis of the scene, investigators pieced together his final horrific moments. The attackers had brutally beaten him until he could no longer fight back. Then, they bound his hands behind his back with the same bandages wrapped around his collarbone, and used those bandages to strangle him to death. His murder was neither quick nor merciful, but slow, cruel, and agonizing. The chaotic, overlapping footprints surrounding the body revealed it, multiple attackers. The police reached their chilling conclusion. At least 3 killers had participated. After transporting the victim's body back to the station, the police immediately began their efforts to identify the young man. But there was a problem. His face was too mutilated to recognize. The relentless beating had shattered his features, leaving only a blood-swallowing ruin. As investigators faced this daunting challenge, it seemed the nameless corpse might remain a mystery lost to violence. Then the phone rang. The caller was the headmaster of the island school, a prestigious institution in Hong Kong. His voice trembling with unease, urgency, and dread, he reported that 2 of his students, 17-year-old Kenneth McBride and 18-year-old Nicola Mayers, had vanished. They had left school the previous afternoon but never made it home. That morning, their worried parents called the school, discovering the chilling truth: both students were missing. The headmaster contacted the police, seeking help in locating the teenagers. As he described their appearance, a cold realization settled over the officers. The young foreign male found at Braemar Hill that morning matched the description of one of the missing students. It was too much of a coincidence to ignore. The police immediately relayed their suspicions to the headmaster. After a heavy silence, in a grim and solemn tone, he agreed to contact the boy's parents immediately. Together, they would come to the station to identify the body. When the headmaster and the Kenneth family arrived at the station, the air was heavy with unspoken dread. With trembling hands and eyes filled with unshed tears, they took one final careful look at the body. And then, the words felt like a death sentence. The victim was Kenneth McBride, the missing 17-year-old boy from Island School. A wave of sorrow washed over the room, but the horror was far from over. Kenneth hadn't been alone. According to his classmates, he had left school that afternoon with his girlfriend, Nicola Mayers. Now, Kenneth was dead. So where was Nicola? A cold realization gripped the officers. There was only one explanation: Nicola was dead too. It was a bold assumption, but it was one the police were no longer willing to dismiss. With this grim new lead, officers launched an intensive search across Braemar Hill, combing through the dense undergrowth, scouring the silent wilderness for another lost soul. It didn't take long. Not far from where Kenneth's battered body had been found, they discovered her. Nicola was dead. The condition of her body was even more disturbing. She was almost completely naked. Her t-shirt had been pulled up over her head, concealing what lay beneath. As the officers reached forward, their hands hesitated, as if sensing the unspeakable horror that awaited him. And then they lifted the fabric. The sight sent a jolt of pure horror through the team. Nicola's face was no longer a face. It was a shattered mass of blood and broken bone. Her jaw had been completely crushed, her left eye missing, ripped from its socket. A final chilling confirmation. She hadn't just been murdered, she had been mutilated. The officers stared in silent disbelief as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of a brutality beyond comprehension. What kind of monster had done this, and why? One thing was certain: this was no ordinary murder. There was a crime born from pure evil, with a grim determination to uncover the full extent of the horror. The police transported Nicola's mutilated body back to the station, placing it in the hands of the forensic pathologist. What they found would haunt them forever. Nicola hadn't just been beaten. She had been brutalized beyond human comprehension. Her body bore severe external injuries, but the true horror lay beneath the surface. Before her death, she had suffered a vicious sexual assault. Her private parts had been violently torn apart, so much so that the forensic team could hardly comprehend the sheer brutality. And then they made a sickening discovery. Inside the torn flesh, they found splinters of wood and shards of glass. It was no longer just a case of rape and murder. It was an act of pure sadism. But the nightmare didn't stop there. As investigators combed through the crime scene, they came to another chilling realization. The location where Kenneth and Nicola's body had been found were not the original crime scene. They had been dumped. The true slaughterhouse was still out there, Determined to uncover the first crime scene, the police launched a massive operation. They mobilized 600 officers, deployed helicopters, and conducted a full-scale grilled search of Braemar Hill. For 2 long days, they searched. Nothing. Then, on the 3rd day, a breakthrough. Deep within a small wooded area, an officer stumbled upon something that sent a chill down his spine. Scattered among the leaves and dirt, he found a set of clothes and jewelry, items that were soon confirmed to belong to Nicola. But that wasn't all. Lying nearby were several wooden sticks, crudely broken off from nearby trees. The sticks were stained with blood, embedded with strands of human hair. And then, the most disturbing piece of evidence yet, a discarded glass bottle, its surface smeared with blood. Despite securing potential DNA and fingerprints evidence from the crime scene, the police faced an insurmountable hurdle. It was 1985, and forensic technology was still primitive. They had no way of identifying the killer through DNA comparison. And then the next blow came. The fingerprints lifted from the blood-stained glass bottle, the ones they had hoped would lead straight to the murderer, were useless. After cross-checking them against Hong Kong's criminal records database, they found no match. Whoever had done this had never been caught before. They weren't just hunting a murderer, they were hunting a ghost. With forensic evidence leading nowhere, the police changed tactics. They turned to the victims themselves, searching for a motive buried somewhere in their past. Had Kenneth or Nicola made enemies? Was this a vendetta, a crime, of revenge? They started digging into their families, but what they found was nothing but disappointment. Kenneth and Nicola's parents were engineers, quiet, private individuals with small social circles. The families had only recently moved to Hong Kong. They had been here for less than a year. There was no time to make enemies. And as for the young couple themselves, they were model students, well liked by their peers, with no history of conflict or troubled relationships, no grudges, no threats, no enemies. With revenge as a motive ruled out, the police turned their focus elsewhere. They needed more evidence. They needed to unmask the face of the devil who had done this. And they needed to do it fast, before they struck again. Determined to break the silence, the police launched an emergency tip hotline, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. They sealed off the area around the crime scene, blocking off Center Building, and began an exhaustive 6-month-long door-to-door investigation throughout the surrounding residential areas. But despite the relentless efforts, nothing, not a single breakthrough. For 6 months, the case remained frozen in time, a wound that refused to heal. As the months dragged on, Kenneth and Nicola's families were left with no choice but to bring their children home. With heavy hearts and eyes filled with tears, they returned to England, where Kenneth and Nicola were finally laid to rest, but without justice. The weight of public scrutiny began to bear down on the Hong Kong police. Both Hong Kong and British media relentlessly pressured authorities, criticizing the lack of progress, demanding answers that no one had. Under the crushing weight of public outrage, the police doubled down on their efforts. They issued a bounty, 50,000 Hong Kong dollars, for any information leading to the killer. Then, in an unexpected turn, Kenneth's father's company stepped in. The CEO, deeply moved by the tragedy, personally increased the bounty to 550,000 Hong Kong dollars, an astronomical sum, impossible to ignore. And then, the silence cracked. A phone call came in. The caller claimed to know something. He spoke in hushed tones, his words laced with unease. He said he had been on a ferry one day when he overheard a chilling conversation. A triad thug named Pang Shunyi had been boasting to his friends, bragging about killing a foreigner. And then, with a smirk, Pang had pointed to his feet. "These Nikes," he had said. "I took them off his dead body." The caller shuddered at the memory. He recognized the Nike logo immediately. His sister worked for Nike, and he knew shoes better than most. But when he asked his sister about this particular model, she told him something chilling. That shoes was a brand new release, only available in the UK. It hadn't even reached Hong Kong yet. The moment the police heard the informant's explosive revelation, they zeroed in on their new target, Pang Shunyi. For the next month, investigators shadowed his every move, digging into his associates, habits, and connections. And what they found was deeply unsettling. Pang wasn't just a petty thug. He ran with a pack of wolves, and 4 other men from his gang fit the profile of the killers. With the evidence mounting against them, the police made their move. Officers swept in, rounding up 3 adult suspects: Pang Shuangyi, 24, Tam Zifang, 25, Chu Waimeng, 27. Alongside them, they also arrested 2 minors: Yam Samlam, 17, Chung Yonghang, 16. The Braemar Hill killers had finally been caught. Back at the station, the hard evidence left no room for doubts. The DNA taken from Nicola's body, the fingerprints on the murder weapons, the forensic matches from the crime scene. Every single clue pointed to these 5 men. They were the ones who beat Kenneth to death. They were the ones who tortured Nicola. They were the ones who violated her and left her to die in agony. There are no escape. But when the interrogation began, the suspects didn't break. Instead, the officers were met with a wall of silence, lies, and defiance. No one confessed. No one admitted to being the ringleader. No one would even reveal the full details of the crime, especially the 3 adult gang members: Pang Shuangyi, Tam Zifang, and Chu Waimeng, seasoned criminals who had spent years in the triads. They were no ordinary street thugs. They knew how to handle an interrogation. They weren't afraid of the police. They were cold, hardened, and calculated. Their answers were practiced, careful, evasive. They had been through this before. The detectives pushed, but the gangster pushed back harder. And just when it seemed like the case was about to stall again, the police changed tactics. They turned their sights on the 2 youngest members, Yam Samlam and Chu Yaohang. Teenagers, not yet fully hardened, not yet immune to fear, pressure, and guilt. They weren't ready for what was coming. The police were about to break them, and once they did, the truth behind the Braemar Hill murders would finally come to light. Throughout the interrogation, the younger suspect, Chu Yaohang, remained evasive. He didn't admit to anything, but his ambiguous attitude suggested he was holding back, testing the waters, waiting to see how things would unfold. But then, the officers noticed something far more telling. The other minor, Yam Samlam, wasn't just silent. He was terrified. His hands trembled. His eyes darted around the room, as if looking for escape that didn't exist. He was cracking. The police pounced on the opportunity. They leaned in, their voices calm but firm, delivering a message designed to shake him to his core. We already have all the evidence we need. Whether you confess or not, you're going down. The words hit like a hammer, but then came the baited hook. But you, Yam, you're still young. You're minor. The law will go easier on you. Show remorse, cooperate, help us close the case. Do that, and we can fight for a lighter sentence. Do nothing, will rot in prison for the rest of your life. The room fell silent. Yam Samlam's breath grew shallow, his mind racing through every possible outcome. He had seen what happened to guys who took the fall in their triads. He knew what life in prison really meant, and the truth was, he wasn't ready to die behind bars. So after a long, agonizing pause, he exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his own guilt. And then he confessed. Every gruesome, unimaginable detail spilled out of his mouth. The torture, the beatings, the final moments of Kenneth and Nicola's suffering. According to Yam Samlam's confession, it all started with a theft. That evening, under the guidance of their leader, Pang Shuangyi, the 5 of them climbed up Braemar Hill. The original plan simple and opportunistic: steal copper wiring from government utility cables and sell it for cash, nothing more. But as they ascended, fate led them to a far darker crime. Deep within the secluded grove, they spotted something unexpected. A young couple, foreign students, looked in an intimate embrace. Kenneth McBride and Nicola Mayers. The gang paused, watching from the shadows. Pang Shuangyi let out a low chuckle, mocking them. "Look at these foreign kids," he sneered. "School zows, and instead of hitting the bars, they come up here to fool around? Weird as hell." His comment stirred some laughter. But at that moment, none of them had any real interest in the couple. Not yet. They continued their climb, intent on their original goal: copper wiring, quick cash, nothing else. But then, a glint in the sunlight caught Pang's eye, a flash of gold. His gaze locked onto Kenneth's wrist, a gold watch, shimmering in the setting sun. And just like that, everything changed. In Pang's mind, that watch wasn't just expensive, it was a promise. If that kid's wearing something this flashy, they must be rich. Pang Shuangyi didn't hesitate. Let's rob them. Stealing copper wires would bring in a few $100s at best, but that watch alone, easily worth tens of thousands. The group didn't need convincing. These men were no strangers to robbery. They had done this before. A few whispered agreements, a few nods, the decision was made. But Yam Samnam hesitated. What if the guy fights back? Kenneth looked strong, muscular, broad-shouldered, someone who wouldn't go down easily. But Pan, after the predator, had already noticed something. His eyes locked onto Kenneth's collarbone, where bandages peeked out from his shirt. Look at that, Pan sneered. He's already injured. 5 of us, weapons, and him, a wooden kid. This won't take long. And just like that, Yam's last shred of doubt vanished. Under Pan's orders, the group rushed into clearing, shouting, surrounding, hunting. Robbery! Their voices rang out, shattering the peace of the secluded grove. Kenneth and Nicola froze, their faces draining of color. Terror flashed in their eyes, but they fought to stay calm. In broken Cantonese, Kenneth tried to reason with them. We'll give you money, valuables, just don't use violence. Pan smirked. Sure. The group stripped them of everything. Kenneth's gold watch, Nicola's bracelet, her backpack, the loose change inside. But the moment Pan examined the bracelets, his disgust was immediate. Cheap crap. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it aside, letting one of the others pick it up like a piece of trash. To the group, this was supposed to be quick and clean. Rob, run, disappear into the night. But then, Pan's eyes fell on Nicola, and his mind shifted from greed to desire. Let's search her, he said, his tone laced with something vile. Make sure she's not hiding anything valuable. The moment their eyes met, Nicola understood. She saw it in his face, in the way he looked at her. She shook her head, refusing before he could even move. No, but Pan didn't ask twice. He laughed for her, grabbing her by the arm, yanking her toward the woods. Kenneth reacted instantly. Without hesitation, he threw himself at Pan, fist flying, fighting for the woman he loved. The others didn't just watch. The moment Kenneth fought back, they joined in, all 4 of them against the one wooden boy. Kenneth held his ground, but he was already injured, and 5 against 1, it didn't take long for him to be overpowered. With each punch, each kick, Kenneth staggered. And when he realized he couldn't win, he made a desperate choice. Run, she shouted. Nicola, run! And she did. With one last look at Kenneth, she turned and fled, vanishing into the trees. Pan cursed, go after her. Tam Zifan took off running, chasing Nicola into the darkness of the woods. The rest, they stayed behind to finish Kenneth. The beating continued, relentless, merciless. They kicked his collarbone, fracturing it further, turning his previous injury into pure agony. Then, they ripped the bandages off his body, twisted them around his wrist, bound him like an animal, and then, with wooden sticks stolen from the trees, they beat him again, one below, then another, and another, over 100 times until his body collapsed, until his consciousness slipped away. But that wasn't enough. They wanted to make sure he never woke up again. So, with the last scraps of bandages from his body, they wrapped them around his neck and strangled him to death. Yam Samnom confessed that Nicola hadn't made it far. By the time they had finished with Kenneth, she had already been caught. Under Pan Shengyi's order, the other 4 stayed behind, keeping watching over Kenneth's lifeless body, while Pan dragged Nicola deeper into the woods. She struggled, she begged, she pleaded, but it didn't matter. Pan stripped her, taking his time as he violated her, and then, one by one, the others followed. Yang admitted that after killing Kenneth, something inside them had changed. It was as if their violent urges had been fully awakened. The need to destroy, to break, to obliterate, it had overtaken all reason. It wasn't enough to rape her. They tortured her. They used tree branches and a broken glass bottle, forcing them inside her, tearing her apart from the inside out. The pain must have been unimaginable, but they weren't done. When there was nothing left to ruin, they picked up their weapons again. They beat her, the same way they had beaten Kenneth, except longer, harder, crueler. For over an hour, they took turns, smashing her body, striking over and over until she was unrecognizable. Yam said he lost count of how many times they hit her. He only remembered one thing, where her face had become nothing but a bloody pulp, where her body had stopped moving, where the life had fully left her. That was when they stopped. Not because they felt remorse, not because they had finally realized what they had done, simply because there was nothing left to destroy. After it was over, Pan made the final decision. get rid of them. They dragged Kenneth's and Nicola's bodies to different parts of Braemar Hill, dumping them like trash, before disappearing into the city, as if nothing had ever happened. When the police brought Yam Sum-Lum to point out the first crime scene, what they found shattered any last shred of doubt. The ground was still stained with blood. Among the dirt, leaves, and dried carnage, they found Nicola's missing left eye. Every single piece of forensic evidence matched. The crime, the brutality, the unspeakable horror. It was all real. After confirming the crime scene, the police took Yam Sum-Lum back to the station. His face was pale, his hands shook. For the first time, perhaps, he understood what he had been a part of. With all the evidence gathered, the police began preparing for trial. The Braemar Hill murders were no longer a mystery. Now, it was only a matter of justice. Amid the long and bureaucratic legal process, time marched forward, and soon it was 1987. That year, all 5 perpetrators were convicted of murder and sentenced to death with suspended execution. But in 1992, the governor of Hong Kong, in accordance with standard practice, commuted to the death sentence of the 3 adult criminals, Pang Chunyi, Tam Zifang, and Chu Waimeng, to life imprisonment. As for the 2 juvenile offenders, Yam Sum-Lum and Chu Yaoheng, because they were under 18 at the time of the crime, their final sentence were left to be decided by the British Crown once they reached adulthood. Then came to 1997, the eve of Hong Kong's handover to China. At that point, 5 years had passed, and Yang and Chun still didn't know their final sentences. Their families protested outside the governor's office, demanding a final decision before Hong Kong ceased to be a British colony. Before the British government could issue a ruling, Hong Kong's sovereignty was officially transferred to China. It wasn't until 1998, when Dong Zhenhua, Hong Kong's first chief executive under Chinese rule, took office, that the 2 juvenile sentences were finalized. In a twist no one expected, the father of the victim, Kenneth McBride, wrote a letter to Dong Zhenhua, pleading for leniency on Yam's behalf. Moved by this request, Dong Zhenhua ultimately sentenced Yam Sum-Lum to 27 years in prison, while Chun Yaoheng received a harsher 35-year sentence. Unhappy with the ruling, Chun appealed, arguing that his sentence was too severe. But after 8 years of legal battles, on April 6, 2006, the Hong Kong court rejected his appeal. Meanwhile, in September 2004, after serving less than 20 years, Yam Sum-Lum was granted early release for behavior. At age 35, he walked out of prison a free man. And under a reintegration program, he was placed in a law firm, starting a new life despite the horrors he had once committed. As for Chu Yaoheng, after his failed appeal, he remained behind bars for another 11 years, finally being released in 2017. And so, after more than 3 decades, one of the most gruesome, shocking, and unforgettable murders in Hong Kong's history finally came to its long-awaited end. Thank you for watching. My name is Charles, focusing on crime case storytelling. If you like my channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification button. If there's a case you want me to explore and tell, feel free to leave a comment. I'll see you next time.